Marcus Torres, FBI, keep your hands where I can see them.
What is this?
What you're about to see is the final shift for a McConnell Unit corrections officer whose badge gave him access to one of the most dangerous smuggling operations in Texas prison history. 17 officers, 29 arrests. One federal racketeering indictment that exposed how inmates were running cartel vehicle theft rings from inside a state prison.
I just got home from my shift. What is
Your
happening?
cell phone smuggled into McConnell Unit and sold to inmates for $5,000 each to coordinate criminal operations. I have been a corrections officer for 6 years. I would never smuggle contraband.
48 hours from this moment, federal agents would be standing in his driveway in Beeville with a sealed indictment naming him on 17 counts of racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to distribute contraband inside a state correctional facility. The investigation that brought them there had been running for almost 4 years. Every phone he carried through the staff checkpoint, every cash envelope handed off in a gas station parking lot off Highway 59, every text message he thought he had deleted, all of it documented. The man on this footage is Raymond De La Cruz, a 9-year corrections officer at the McConnell Unit, and the case the United States Attorney was about to file against him would eventually be called Operation Prison Cell. Before we go any further, what would you do if you found out the person hired to keep dangerous men locked away was the one smuggling tools into their hands? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. We cover the cases the local news buries on page 6 every single week. Raymond Anthony De La Cruz was born in August of 1978 in Alice, Texas, a small oil and ranching town about an hour west of Corpus Christi. His father, Hector, worked the rigs out of 3 Rivers for Conoco, gone for 10-day shifts and home for 4, smelling of diesel and salt water when he walked through the door. His mother, Yolanda, kept the books for a feed and tractor supply on Main Street, where Raymond and his 2 younger sisters spent most weekday afternoons of their childhood doing homework on a folding table behind the register, while the bell above the front door rang every 15 minutes. The De La Cruz family lived in a 3-bedroom brick ranch on the north side of Alice, with a chain-link fence around a yellow patch of Bermuda grass and a Ford F-150 always parked in the driveway. They were not poor, they were not comfortable. They were Texas working class, the kind of family that paid the mortgage on time, voted Republican without thinking too hard about it, and trusted that hard work would eventually be rewarded. Raymond was the oldest. He played offensive line for Alice High School. Never a starter, never a star, but he showed up to every 2-a-day in August heat that pushed 105 degrees and never quit a drill. His senior yearbook photo shows a heavy-set kid with a buzz cut and a closed-mouth smile, dressed in a borrowed sport coat that did not quite fit across his shoulders. He graduated in May of 1997 with a C average and no plans for college. For the next 4 years, he bounced. He spent 18 months on an offshore service boat out of Port Aransas, hauling supplies to drilling platforms in the Gulf, making $14 an hour and saving almost none of it. He came back to land and worked the night shift at a coastal mart in Kingsville. Then a year as a roughneck on a land rig outside Cotulla, where he broke 2 fingers on his left hand and decided oil work was not the future his father had promised it would be. In the fall of 2001, he saw a flyer at the post office. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice was hiring corrections officers across the southern region. Starting pay was $22,400 a year, with full state benefits, paid training, and the possibility of overtime that could push the number closer to 30. The flyer mentioned the McConnell Unit by name. Raymond drove the 43 miles to Beeville the next morning and filled out an application in the lobby. He was 23 years old when he was accepted into the TDCJ Pre-Service Training Academy at Gatesville. 6 weeks. Defensive tactics, use of force law, contraband recognition, gang identification, the procedural foundations of the Texas Administrative Code as it applied to correctional facilities. His training file would later be released as part of the federal discovery process. The evaluations were unremarkable in the way that most institutional records are unremarkable. Officer Dela Cruz demonstrates adequate physical conditioning, one entry read. Shows respectful attitude toward instructors. Occasionally requires additional review on report writing protocol. Another. Reliable, punctual, works well in team settings. Recommend for assignment. He was sworn in on April 14, 2002, and reported to the McConnell Unit the following Monday. His starting salary was $23,100. His first assigned post was the day room in Building 3, a medium custody housing area holding roughly 500 inmates across 2 wings. He married Crystal Marie Vasquez in October of 2003. They had grown up 4 blocks apart in Alice. She worked as a dental hygienist at a clinic in Beeville and made about what he did. They put a down payment on a small frame house on Charco Road in the spring of 2005, a 2-bedroom on 1/3 of an acre with a detached garage Raymond used as a workshop. Their daughter Sophia was born in June of 2006. Their son Mateo followed in September of 2008. The family photos from that period, the ones investigators would later seize from a laptop hard drive, show a man who looked tired but proud. Birthday parties in the backyard with paper plates and a Spider-Man piñata hanging from a mesquite branch. A baptism at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Alice with both sets of grandparents standing behind the baby. A Father's Day cookout where Raymond stood at the grill in a Cowboys jersey, holding tongs in one hand and a Lone Star long neck in the other, mid-laugh at something his brother-in-law had said. His annual TDCJ performance reviews from 2003 through 2007 were consistently solid. Meets expectations. Demonstrates good judgment in inmate interactions. Maintains proper distance and authority on the unit. In 2006, his supervising sergeant wrote that Dela Cruz has shown leadership potential and is recommended for consideration as a field training officer for new hires. By 2008, he was earning $29,400 a year, plus another $6,000 to $8,000 in overtime, depending on the month. It was not enough. The mortgage on Charco Road was $490 a month. Crystal's hours at the clinic had been cut after Mateo was born. They were carrying a balance on 3 credit cards. The transmission on the Ford Expedition went out in February of 2009, and the repair cost $2,800 they did not have. Raymond paid for it with a payday loan from a storefront in Beeville at an effective interest rate that, when finally untangled by federal forensic accountants, came to 241% annual. By the spring of 2009, Raymond de la Cruz had been a Texas corrections officer for almost 7 years. He had a clean disciplinary file, a wife, 2 small children, a mortgage, and a sergeant who had written that he had leadership potential. He also had $3,100 in revolving debt, a payday loan he could not service, and an 8-year-old expedition that was already making a new noise. That was the version of Raymond de la Cruz that an inmate in Building 3 first approached with an offer. The McConnell Unit sits on a flat stretch of B County prairie, about 3 miles east of the Beeville city limits, just off State Highway 212. From the parking lot, it looks like what it is, a sprawl of low concrete buildings inside a double row of chain link topped with concertina wire. gun towers at the corners, the Texas flag and the United States flag snapping in the wind off the Gulf. The facility opened in 1989 and was named after a former state senator. It holds approximately 2,800 male inmates across 5 housing units, classified from minimum custody up through close custody, with a separate administrative segregation building for the most dangerous offenders in the system. The population includes members of every major Texas prison gang: the Texas Syndicate, the Mexican Mafia, the Aryan Circle, the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, Tango Blast, the Bloods, the Crips. The staff entry is on the east side of the administrative building. Corrections officers reporting for shift parked in the employee lot, walked across a covered breezeway, and entered through a single secure door supervised by a uniformed control booth officer. Inside the entry vestibule were 2 pieces of screening equipment: a walk-through metal detector calibrated to commercial airport sensitivity, and a hand-wand backup for secondary screening if the walk-through alerted. There was no body scanner. There was no X-ray belt for lunch bags or jackets. There was no narcotics detection canine on duty for the staff line. An officer was permitted to bring in a clear plastic lunch container, a thermos, a single set of personal keys, a wallet, and a TDCJ-issued radio. Everything else stayed in the locker outside. The system, on paper, was airtight. In practice, it relied on one assumption: that the officers walking through it were not the contraband. A cell phone in a small flip form factor, with the battery removed and the SIM card separately wrapped, could be broken into 3 pieces, each one small enough to be wrapped in plastic and concealed in places a walk-through metal detector was never designed to find. The screws and the speaker magnet were the only consistent ferrous components, and a corrections officer who knew exactly where the calibration threshold was set could test the limits over weeks of routine entries until he understood precisely what would and would not trigger an alert. Inside the prison, the economy of contraband ran on cash that never crossed the wire. An inmate with family on the outside would arrange for a payment to be made to a girlfriend, to a cousin, to an unrelated third party at a Western Union counter in Houston or Dallas or Corpus Christi. The corrections officer never touched a state inmate trust account, never accepted commissary credit, never signed for anything that left a paper trail inside the facility. The payment was made outside. The product was delivered inside. The 2 halves of the transaction were separated by a security fence and a payroll department. Texas Department of Criminal Justice policy, then and now, prohibited inmates from possessing any electronic communication device. The reason was not bureaucratic. In 2008, a death row inmate at the McConnell Unit had used a smuggled cell phone to call a state senator at home and recite his daughter's address, her car, and her daily routine. The phone had been smuggled in by a corrections officer. The inmate had been on death row for 9 years. That phone, and the political firestorm that followed it, was the reason the staff entry at McConnell had been upgraded to walk-through metal detection in the first place. It was also the reason that, by 2009, the price of a working smartphone inside a Texas state prison had climbed past $2,000. By 2011, a top-end Android device with a charging cord and a prepaid SIM was selling on the yard at McConnell for as much as $5,000. That was the market Raymond de la Cruz walked into. The first phone went in on a Wednesday in April of 2009. He carried it in the cargo pocket of his uniform pants, broken into 3 pieces, each piece wrapped in a layer of black electrical tape, and then in a layer of plastic cling film. He had practiced the geometry in his garage on Charco Road for 2 weeks, taping fragments of an old Motorola Razr to the inside of a pair of utility pants and walking back and forth through the doorway between his kitchen and his living room, until he was confident the metal in the phone would not exceed the metal in his belt buckle, his watch, and his wedding ring. He walked through the staff entry at 5:47 a.m. The control booth officer waved him through after the wand sweep on his belt. He keyed into Building 3 at 6:02. By 6:18, he had completed his first welfare check of the wing, dropped the 3 plastic-wrapped components into a folded TDCJ-issued laundry bag in the supply closet outside cell block C, and walked away. The inmate who picked them up 40 minutes later was a Texas syndicate member serving a 40-year sentence for aggravated robbery. The cash payment, $2,100, had been wired to a woman named Brittany Acevedo in Corpus Christi the previous afternoon. Brittany Acevedo was the sister of Crystal Dela Cruz's college roommate. She kept $400 for the use of her name and her bank account, and she handed the rest to Raymond in cash at a Stripes gas station off Padre Island Drive the next Saturday morning. He paid off the payday loan that week. He paid down 2 of the 3 credit cards over the next 2 months. He did not tell Crystal where the money came from. He told her he had picked up extra shifts. She did not ask the questions her job and her tiredness and her trust would not let her ask. The second phone went in 3 weeks later. The third, the fourth, and the fifth followed across the summer. By August of 2009, Raymond de la Cruz was carrying an average of 1 phone per week through the McConnell staff entry, and the price had crept up to $2,300 per device. By the end of that calendar year, he had moved 37 phones, generated just over $78,000 in cash for himself, and never once tripped the walk-through metal detector at the staff line. The operation grew because the demand grew. The inmates buying the phones from him were not, by and large, calling their children. They were running businesses. A Texas syndicate captain in Wing C was coordinating heroin distribution in 3 Houston zip codes from a flip phone hidden inside the hollow leg of a metal frame bunk. An Aryan Brotherhood member in administrative segregation was directing a methamphetamine pipeline that moved product from El Paso through San Antonio to Beaumont. A Tango Blast lieutenant in Building 4 was managing a network of street-level dealers in the Rio Grande Valley, using SMS messages routed through a prepaid cricket account that his cousin in Far kept current at a corner store. Raymond did not know the specifics. He did not want to know the specifics. He knew he carried packages. He received cash through a thin chain of intermediaries that never put his name on a receipt, and he did not ask what the phones were being used for once they were inside. By the middle of 2010, he had brought in 2 more officers. Tomas Resendez, 28, a third-year CO assigned to Building 4, who had a second child on the way and a girlfriend with a heroin habit he did not yet realize was as expensive as it was. Brandon Cole Whitaker, 31, a 4-year CO assigned to administrative segregation, who had a tax debt from a failed lawn care business and a stepson who needed orthodontic work the family insurance would not cover. Both of them came through Raymond. Both of them split their take with him at 20% off the top, which Raymond justified to himself as a finder's fee and a logistical premium. The operation, at its peak in 2011, was moving between 3 and 5 phones a week into McConnell through 3 different officers, with payments aggregated through 4 different intermediaries in Corpus Christi, Robstown, Houston, and Brownsville. The internal yard price had climbed past $3,000. By the end of 2011, Raymond de la Cruz had personally cleared more than $240,000 in cash since the first phone walked through the staff entry on that Wednesday in April of 2009. He bought a new Ford F-250 King Ranch in the summer of 2011. $58,000, financed in his cousin's name, the down payment made in cash from a safe deposit box at a Frost Bank branch in Corpus Christi. He put a $30,000 in-ground pool in the backyard on Charco Road. He took Crystal and the kids to Disney World for 10 days. He told her he had been moved to a supervisory pay band. She did not check the deposit slips. There were warnings. There were always warnings. A sergeant in Building 4 wrote in an internal memo in March of 2011 that contraband recovery rates in the wing had dropped to almost zero, despite credible intelligence that gang communications were intensifying. A unit intelligence officer flagged, in an unsigned note that was later recovered from a desk drawer during the federal search, that Officer De La Cruz had been observed making 3 separate non-route detours into the laundry supply area during a single shift in February. The note was never logged. No one looked. No one checked. The institution trusted the men who walked through its own door. It started with a stolen Tahoe on a Tuesday morning in October of 2009. A Texas Department of Public Safety trooper named Felix Aranda was working the southbound stretch of U.S. Highway 77 between Kingsville and Raymondville when he clocked a black GMC Yukon doing 86 in a 75 zone. He lit the vehicle up and pulled it over onto the shoulder a mile north of the Sarita checkpoint. The driver was a 24-year-old white male with a face tattoo of a swastika behind his right ear and a Texas driver's license belonging to a man who had reported it stolen in San Antonio 9 months earlier. The VIN on the Yukon, when Trooper Aranda ran it through dispatch, came back as a vehicle reported stolen out of a residential driveway in League City 3 days earlier. In the back seat of the Yukon, in a black duffel bag, were 2 laptop computers, a Glock 19 with the serial number ground off, $1,400 in cash, and a Samsung flip phone with a Texas area code and a contact list of 3 numbers, all of them stored under initials. The driver, when interviewed at the Clayburgh County Jail 2 hours later, identified himself as a member of the Aryan Circle. He named 2 other men, Confederates, he said, who had been driving a second stolen vehicle, a silver Cadillac Escalade, on a parallel route toward Brownsville. Texas Department of Public Safety and U.S. Border Patrol intercepted the Escalade outside Falfurrias at 4:12 that afternoon. Both vehicles had been destined, the driver eventually admitted, for a chop yard outside Matamoros operated by individuals associated with the Gulf Cartel. The Samsung flip phone from the Yukon was sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety's Digital Forensics Lab in Austin. The call logs and SMS history on that phone, when extracted 3 weeks later, showed 41 inbound and outbound contacts with a second cell phone over the previous 9 days. That second cell phone, when geolocated through cellular tower triangulation, pinged consistently from a single coordinate. A coordinate that, when overlaid on a satellite image, was the exact geographic center of the McConnell Unit. The Texas Rangers were brought in within 48 hours. The TDCJ Office of Inspector General was looped in shortly after. By December, the case had been federalized under the racketeering and conspiracy statutes, and the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas was running a multi-agency task force that included the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons Intelligence Unit. The investigation was given a code name. They called it Operation Prison Cell. The Aryan Circle inmate who had been making and receiving the calls from inside McConnell was identified, isolated, and quietly transferred to a federal holding facility in January of 2010, where he eventually agreed to cooperate in exchange for a non-prosecution agreement on the auto theft conspiracy He could not, he told investigators, identify by face the officer who had brought him his phone. The phone had been left for him in a laundry bag in a supply closet by someone he never saw. But, he said, he had been told the name once. He had been told the officer's name was Ray. There were, at the McConnell Unit in 2010, 11 corrections officers whose first or middle name was some variation of Raymond, Ray, or Raimundo. The investigation took almost 3 more years. The federal task force did not move quickly. Moving quickly, the lead agent later told a reporter, would have given up the case. Moving carefully, quietly, surgically, across months and then years, was what eventually produced an indictment that did not collapse on a defense motion. The first investigative tool was the staff parking lot. FBI surveillance was authorized in February of 2010 to photograph license plates of every corrections officer entering and leaving the McConnell employee lot for 30 consecutive days. The license plates were run against vehicle registrations. Vehicle registrations were run against credit reports, and credit reports were filtered for officers whose financial profile showed an unexplained improvement between January of 2009 and the present. Raymond de la Cruz's name appeared on the resulting short list of 7. The second tool was the bank records. Under federal subpoena, every checking, savings, and credit account associated with the 7 names was pulled and reviewed by a forensic accountant assigned to the task force. Raymond's accounts showed nothing irregular. He was not depositing the money. He was not, the accountant noted in a memo, behaving like a man whose income had changed. The third tool was the cousin. The Ford F-250 King Ranch that Raymond had bought in the summer of 2011 was registered to a man named Jaime de la Cruz, who lived in Robstown and was Raymond's first cousin. The original financing documents, when pulled, showed the down payment had been made in cash. The cash deposit had been made at a Frost Bank branch in Corpus Christi. The deposit slip had been signed by Jaime de la Cruz. But the security camera footage from the lobby of that branch, when subpoenaed and reviewed 18 months after the deposit, showed Raymond de la Cruz, in his TDCJ uniform, standing at the teller window during the relevant transaction. That single video clip, 4 minutes and 11 seconds long, was the moment the case turned. The fourth tool was the wire. In April of 2012, with the cooperation of the Texas syndicate Inmate, who had been the first identified buyer, the federal task force introduced a recorded asset into the McConnell yard, an inmate already cooperating on an unrelated case, who placed an order for a phone through the existing channel and described in detail every step of the transaction across the next 90 days. The plastic-wrapped components dropped in the laundry bag in the supply closet outside Cell Block C in Building 3. The cash payment wired to a woman named Brittany Acevedo. The address on the wire confirmation. The signature on the Western Union receipt. The fifth tool was the phone itself. Raymond's phone, the one in his pocket. Under a Title III wiretap authorization granted in June of 2012, every call and text Raymond made or received was captured for 110 days. The intercepts were unspectacular. Raymond was careful. He did not discuss the operation on his own line, but he did, on one Sunday afternoon in August, text Brandon Cole Whitaker the words, "Tell T it's 3 not 2. The price went up. If he can't do 3, tell him don't bother." That message, in the context of everything else the task force had already assembled, was enough. The indictment was returned by a federal grand jury in Houston in the spring of 2013 and unsealed publicly on a Thursday morning. 17 former TDCJ corrections officers were named. 12 additional defendants, intermediaries, cash handlers, family members of inmates, were named alongside them. The total was 29. The lead defendant was Raymond Anthony Dela Cruz. Stories like this don't get the attention they deserve because they don't happen in a single dramatic moment. They happen across years, inside buildings nobody is watching. If you want to see more accountability coverage of cases the mainstream media has already moved on from, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We don't let these stories get buried. The arrest happened at 6:42 in the morning on a Thursday in May of 2013 at the house on Charco Road. Raymond was in the kitchen in a TDCJ uniform shirt, half-buttoned, pouring coffee into a thermos for the 7 a.m. shift. Crystal was in the bedroom, getting Sophia ready for second grade. Mateo was still asleep. The knock at the front door came as 3 sharp raps, then a 4th. When Raymond opened the door, he was looking at 4 people. 2 FBI special agents in tactical vests, a Texas Ranger in a white cowboy hat and a Navy jacket with a star on the chest, a TDCJ Office of Inspector General Investigator with a folder under his arm. The lead FBI agent, a woman in her early 40s with sandy hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, held up a folded document. "Raymond Anthony Dela Cruz?" she said. "Yeah. I'm Special Agent Karen Holcomb with the FBI. This is a federal arrest warrant. You're being charged with racketeering, conspiracy to distribute contraband, bribery of a public servant, and 17 related counts. Step out of the doorway and put your hands where I can see them, please." Raymond did not move at first. He looked at the warrant. He looked at the Texas Ranger. He looked back over his shoulder, into the kitchen, where Crystal had appeared in the hallway with Sophia behind her, both of them frozen. "There's a mistake," he said. "Step out of the doorway, sir." "There's a mistake. I work for TDCJ. I'm a corrections officer." "We know who you work for, Mr. Dela Cruz. Step out of the doorway." He stepped onto the porch. Holcomb turned him toward the wall, against the brick, and cuffed his wrists behind his back. The Texas Ranger moved into the doorway and quietly asked Crystal to keep the children in the kitchen while the warrant was read. The TDCJ investigator stayed on the porch with Raymond. "You don't have anything," Raymond said. He said it quietly, almost to himself. "You don't have anything that puts me in a room with a phone." The TDCJ investigator looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Dela Cruz," he said, "we have you on camera at a Frost Bank in Corpus Christi making a $15,000 cash deposit in your cousin's name. We have you on a wiretap telling Officer Whitaker the price went up to $3,000. We have a confidential source who ordered a phone from your laundry bag and watched it walk in. We have your handwriting on the back of 2 Western Union receipts. Whatever you think we don't have, sir, you should think about it again." Raymond looked at the porch boards. "I want a lawyer," he said. Those were the last words he spoke before he was placed in the back of a federal vehicle and driven the 120 miles north to the federal courthouse in Corpus Christi for initial appearance. The indictment, when read in full at the arraignment, ran to 86 pages. The lead charges were brought under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, 18 U.S.C. Parf. 1962, alleging that Raymond Dela Cruz and his 16 co-defendant corrections officers had functioned as an enterprise engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity that included bribery, distribution of contraband, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and the facilitation of crimes of violence directed by incarcerated members of 3 identified Texas prison gangs. Raymond was represented by a court-appointed federal defender named Elena Sandoval out of the Corpus Christi office. She filed motions to suppress the bank surveillance footage, the wiretap intercepts, and the testimony of the cooperating inmate witnesses. Each motion was denied. By the fall of 2013, with the case schedule moving toward a trial date that promised to last 6 weeks and feature more than 90 government witnesses, Sandoval advised her client to consider a plea. 7 of the 17 indicted officers, Raymond included, entered guilty pleas before the year was out. The plea agreement signed by Raymond Anthony de la Cruz on a Tuesday in October of 2013 admitted to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy and 1 count of conspiracy to distribute contraband cellular communication devices within a state correctional facility. In exchange, 15 additional counts were dropped. The agreement stipulated a sentencing range of 108 to 135 months in federal prison. The sentencing hearing was held in February of 2014 before United States District Judge Hilda Vargas. The government called 3 witnesses. 2 were TDCJ administrators who testified to the institutional damage caused by the smuggling network. The third was a woman named Patricia Reagan, the mother of an 18-year-old college freshman in Houston who had been shot and killed in March of 2011 during a robbery coordinated by the Texas syndicate Inmate, who had been Raymond's first buyer. The phone used to direct the robbery had been one of Raymond's. Patricia Reagan stood at the podium in a black dress and read from a single sheet of paper. "My son Carter was 19 days from his 19th birthday," she said. "He was studying mechanical engineering. He worked weekends at a hardware store on Westheimer to pay for his books. The men who shot him were taking orders from inside a Texas prison. The phone they were using to take those orders was put inside that prison by a man wearing a state uniform. I want that man to understand that my son is not coming back. I want him to understand that every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday afternoon for the rest of my life is a room my son will never walk into. I want him to understand that he did this. The system trusted him with a key. He gave the key away." Judge Vargas allowed Raymond a final statement before sentencing. He stood at the defense table in a borrowed gray suit. He apologized to Mrs. Reagan. He apologized to his wife and his children, who were sitting in the second row of the gallery. He apologized to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He said he had made a series of decisions across several years that he could not undo. Judge Vargas listened. Then she spoke. "Mr. de la Cruz," she said, "a corrections officer is not an ordinary employee. A corrections officer is the physical embodiment of the state's promise to keep dangerous people separated from a free society. When you walked through that staff entrance with a cellular telephone in your pocket, you did not simply violate a policy. You broke that promise. You handed dangerous men the ability to reach across a fence and continue to harm the public that paid your salary. The court accepts your expression of remorse, but the court is also obligated to recognize that the harm caused by your conduct extended far beyond the walls of the McConnell Unit. It reached a young man named Carter Reagan on a sidewalk in Houston on a night in March of 2011, and it took his life. I cannot sentence you to the bottom of the range." She sentenced him to 126 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and restitution in the amount of $243,000. The sentence was to be served at the Federal Correctional Institution at Big Spring, a medium-security facility in West Texas. He would be eligible for release in 2023. The broader Operation Prison Cell indictment ultimately resulted in 29 convictions. 7 McConnell Unit former corrections officers pleaded guilty in the racketeering case. The remaining defendants, intermediaries, family members, and inmate co-conspirators were prosecuted across the following 18 months in a series of related cases. The McConnell Unit, in the aftermath of the indictment, installed a full-body scanner at the staff entry, contracted a narcotics detection canine for daily staff line screening, and implemented an internal affairs review of every officer with more than 4 years of service. The reforms cost the state approximately $6 million across the first 18 months and were considered by the TDCJ Office of Inspector General to be only partially successful. 13 years later, at the Mark W. Michael Unit in Tennessee Colony, Texas, 7 people, including 2 former corrections officers, would be arrested in April of 2026 after the same office intercepted more than 100 cell phones, methamphetamines, and synthetic cannabinoids during a drone smuggling operation. One of the defendants, a former officer out of Dallas, had 30 pounds of loose tobacco, 4 cell phones, and receipts for dozens more recovered from her apartment. The contraband had simply learned to fly. Raymond De La Cruz was released from Big Spring in the spring of 2023, 54 months into his supervised release, and returned to a small rental house outside Alice. Crystal had divorced him in 2017. His children were nearly grown. He works at the time of this recording as a parts clerk at a tractor supply store in Jim Wells County. His monthly restitution payment is $175. The phone in his pocket is a flip phone. He says he prefers it. This case was infuriating. But the case on the right-hand side of your screen is somehow worse. And the officer in it didn't even bother to hide it. Click it now.